Hello and welcome to another episode of the Gritty Hour. I have returning guest Sylvia Shults in today. She was on last year. She's a paranormal writer. I don't know if that's the right way to term it, but she has a brand new book out that we'd like to discuss today. So welcome back to the Gritty Hour, Sylvia.
Well, thank you very much, Tom. I'm delighted to be back.
Yes, it's a pleasure to have you back. And the new book that just came out recently was is called Gone on Vacation: Haunted Zoos, Museums, and Amusement Parks. So
Yes.
I have to admit I haven't read it yet, but am intrigued by the title. So what's it all about?
Well, good. I was I had a conversation with a friend of mine. This has been several years ago now, that she was telling me about her experiences at Brookfield Zoo, and I thought to myself, what a wonderful thing to write about. Nobody ever thinks about zoos being haunted, but I'm sure there are haunted zoos out there.
Right.
And I started doing some research on it, and I thought, let's expand this a little more. Let's do haunted zoos and museums, because museums have got to be haunted,
Hmm.
and amusement parks. Let's throw them all into the mix and see what happens. People have really been digging it.
Yeah, good. So has the book been well received so far?
It really has. Yes,
Yeah.
people are very excited about it, I'm happy to say.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm even thinking about doing a second volume of it. I'm collecting even more stories, and the stories just don't stop coming. So
Yeah. Ironically, I was on what I like to call YouTube hell last night at home. And I was watching a whole bunch of um, videos regarding the afterlife. You know,
Mhm.
people's experiences with the near death experiences.
Oh yeah.
So, and the trips today, but and it dawned on me because I knew we were going to talk tonight that you don't really hear about the spirits of animals too much, or the afterlife, if you will, of animals. Do you believe that?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really do believe that animals have souls.
Hmm.
They're I mean, I'm looking at it from a completely human perspective, of course, but animals are such wonderful creatures. I cannot imagine. I mean, they're sentient beings, and I cannot imagine that they don't have some sort of soul that goes on just as we do.
Right.
Um, in the research that I've done, not only for this book, not only for Gone on Vacation, but also just in my regular reading, I have come across many instances of people experiencing the souls of animals. Uh, I was talking years ago with someone from a local group called Peoria Paranormal, and he showed me a picture that they had taken. They were doing a house investigation, a private investigation, private residence, and this woman had a Great Dane that had passed and was absolutely devoted to this dog. I mean, I've got my dog sitting at my feet right now and I'm
Hmm.
petting her. So we're all devoted to our dogs. And the group that was doing this investigation had a thermal camera, and they took a picture in the hallway next to the front door where this Great Dane would usually take a nap. It was his spot. And darned if they didn't catch the apparition of a Great Dane sitting there
Wow.
on the floor. It was
Interesting.
amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing picture.
Hmm. How did that? Well, that concept, that idea of animal souls, how did that come into play when you were writing this book? When you, especially the zoos.
Yeah, they do show up very often in the zoo section.
Hmm.
Um, well, there is the Cincinnati Zoo in Ohio
Hmm.
is very famous for having the ghost of a lioness that pads around the park. And
Hmm.
she's not easy to spot. She will only show up when you're alone, which I think makes the creep factor a whole lot more.
Hmm.
Really ratchets up the spooky factor when you're walking down a path absolutely by yourself and you can hear these big heavy footsteps, and then if you're really lucky or unlucky as the case may be, you'll from off next to you you'll hear the sound of a lioness grunting.
Wow.
like that.
I hope it's still on the right side of the fence, you know, or the cage, whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Another story that I absolutely love to tell is now this story made it into the book just because it's a fantastic, wonderful little story. It doesn't involve a zoo. It involves a natural, a lot like a wilderness preserve
Hmm.
out in the West. This family went on vacation in the mid 1980s. It was a mother and father and two little boys, and they went on vacation. And they were taking a hike through this state park. I think it's somewhere in Montana, but I'm not exactly for sure. But they found a snake on their walk. There are like 13 snakes that species of snakes that call this park home, and they came across one of them. And this snake was really chill, really relaxed. And the father was able to catch it.
Hmm.
And he let the boys stroke it. And I've petted snakes before. They're really kind of cool. They're not slimy at all. They're smooth and muscular and really beautiful.
Hmm.
So the boys wanted to take the snake home. And the mother was like, no, let's not do that. Let's just take a picture and be happy with the picture as our souvenir. And the kids were like, well, okay, fine. So the father stood in the on the hiking trail, and this was a sizable snake. It was about 3 foot long or so, and he held the snake in both hands, held it up for the camera. The mom took the picture, and then the dad knelt down and put the snake on the ground, and he slithered away. And the kids had named it Slinky for the brief time that they had ownership of this snake. So this being the mid 1980s, they had to turn in the roll of film to be developed, and they had to wait several days after the end of their vacation. So they get their vacation pictures back, and they're flipping through, they're reminiscing about the great time they had on vacation. And then they come to the picture of Dad with Slinky.
Hmm.
And Dad is standing there holding a double handful of empty air.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I sort of suspected that's where this story was going, but that's that. I wonder what their reaction was.
I would love to know. The
Was it
story did not include their reaction.
was that the only photo they took? Just the one shot?
I believe so, yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So it was a ghost they were dealing with all that time.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
very relaxed,
Well,
super chill
that
ghost.
that proves the point that animals have souls just like humans. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So what about the museums? Let's get a little bit into that.
Oh, sure thing. Well, I've always had the idea that museums could be very haunted just
Mm-hmm.
because there's so many old things there, and these old things may still have attachments to them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was lucky enough to grow up in the suburbs of Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a couple of really marvelous world-class museums in Chicago that I would visit regularly on school field trips and when cousins would come into town to visit.
Right.
We would all go to the museum. One of the very first ghost stories I ever heard was about a museum. My father collected ghost stories just as
Mm-hmm.
I did.
Mm-hmm.
And he told me when I was in, gosh, third, fourth grade, he told me the story of the screaming mummy at the Field Museum.
Mm-hmm.
The Field Museum has a good collection of both animal and human mummies. One of the mummies is a man named Harwa. He lived about 4,500 years ago. He was the storekeeper for the Temple of Amun. It was a pretty high position. He was basically in charge of receiving the grain and the fruit and the wine that peasants would bring as gifts for the temple and
Mm-hmm.
making sure that it got distributed to all the priests for their upkeep. So when he passed away, he was mummified according to his station. Now, That means that his mummy is very well preserved. It is only his head is unwrapped. If you go to the museum nowadays, he's standing up in his case, and you can see him. He's on display.
Hmm.
Um,
And he's not going anywhere.
he's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
No. Um, the interesting thing about Harwa is that he actually is the first ancient Egyptian ever to take a plane ride. He was part of an exhibit that was put on by General Electric for the 1939 World's Fair in New
Oh,
York City.
wow.
And yeah, General Electric had this display where they set up a beautiful black velour backdrop, and they had Harwa propped up there, and a beautiful mummy case. And when someone walked up to this display and pushed a button, there was an X-ray machine that would zap the mummy with 125,000 volts of electricity and put an X-ray of his skeleton on the backdrop behind.
Wow.
So it was this really neat educational display.
Hmm.
So he was sent by the Field Museum to New York by plane to partake in this display. The other interesting thing about Harwa, there's three interesting things about him. One is he's the first ancient Egyptian to fly on a plane. Second one is he is the only ancient Egyptian that archaeologists have ever found to be named Harwa. Just an interesting little factoid.
Hmm.
The third thing is that he screams.
Okay. That would be the interesting thing. Yeah.
This happened in the mid 1930s at the Field Museum. It was a cold winter's night. The security guards were doing their rounds, and one of the guards was passing by the Egyptian room. Now, the Egyptian exhibit at the Field had a big revamp in the late 1980s, and they put together this really neat display with a little marketplace and a tomb that you can walk through. But before they did that, and this is the exhibit that I knew from my childhood, from my school visits, all of the Egyptian artifacts, including the mummies, were in one great big room.
Hmm.
And the mummies were all displayed in chronological order in one big glass case along the long side of the room. So that's the way the setup was in the 1930s. So the security guard is making his rounds, and he passes by the Egyptian room, and he hears someone screaming, bloody
Hmm.
murder.
Wow.
And he thinks that someone has been locked in the room and has freaking out because there are a bunch of mummies in the room with him.
Right.
So he blows his whistle to summon the other security guards from the other parts of the museum, and they all go racing into the Egyptian room with their flashlights drawn. They turn on the lights, they start looking for whoever's been locked in there, and they can't find anyone.
Mm.
They're looking in corners. They're like, where's this person hiding? They can't find anyone who was doing the screaming. And then all of a sudden, one of the security guards goes, look here, this mummy is off its case. It is off its board. The way the mummies were displayed was they were each displayed on a slant board that was on the floor of this case at about a 45-degree angle.
Hmm.
And the bodies were propped up, and they had a little thing at the foot of the board to keep the body from sliding off the bottom of the board. But one of the mummies was next to its slant board, face down.
Mm.
And the reason we know about this is that Henry Field, who was the head of the anthropology department, wrote about this in his memoir that he published in the early 1950s. And he was the one who had to go into the case the next morning and pick up this mummy and put it back on its board. And before he could do that, he had to pump the poisonous nitrogen gas out of the case. The case was filled with nitrogen gas to cut down on any insect infestation of the bodies.
Ah, okay.
So there was not even any oxygen in this case. There is no way someone could have been playing a prank and broken into the case and put the mummy face down next to its board. There's just no way that it could have happened.
And the mummy that was askew was Harwa.
Well, he's become known as the mummy that was dislodged, but it could very well be that it is not Harwa at all. I'm really not sure why people are so insistent that it is Harwa. Um, when Henry Field described the scene, he said something about the naked, withered body, and Harwa has not been unwrapped. He's still fully in his mummy wrappings, but there was an earlier mummy of a 12-year-old boy named Hori who was completely unwrapped. And chronologically, he was closer to the door than Harwa was.
Mm-hmm.
And from Henry Field's writings, it's very possible that it was Hori that was off of his board instead of Harwa. So I'm really not sure why every paranormal investigator insists that it was Harwa. It could
Mm-hmm.
very well have been a different mummy. It could have been Hori instead.
Or was Harwa the most well-known mummy in that room?
I think so, because of the General Electric exhibit.
Right. So that might have been why folklore has pushed it towards Harwa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, Harwa is by far the best preserved body that the field has.
Mm-hmm. So when they took the X-ray, I hate to go back to the
Oh, that's fine.
1939 World's Fair, but
Yeah.
bones actually showed up.
Yeah,
So the
yeah, the
bones were
X-ray.
pretty well preserved through the
They really were, yeah.
mummification. Yeah.
Under the shriveled skin, the bones were perfectly fine.
Wow.
And there is kind of a funny story about the World's Fair. That exhibit was so popular that Harwa was invited back for the next season of the
Mm-hmm.
World's Fair. So he was returned to Chicago after the season ended. So he basically spent the winter and early spring in Chicago. And then the next spring, he was sent back to New York, and he arrived at the World's Fair from Chicago to New York by way of San Francisco.
That's the wrong way.
He got lost. There
Okay.
was a shipping clerk that made an error and sent him to San Francisco instead
Nice.
of New York.
Oh.
So there were these panicked telegrams flying back and forth between Chicago and New York and the World's Fair and the Field Museum, and they finally located him in San Francisco. And when the mayor of San Francisco realized that he had a visiting dignitary, he actually invited Harwa to several banquets, and the newspaper said that Harwa was a very welcome guest at these banquets because it was a pretty safe bet that he was not going to make any after dinner speeches.
Maybe a couple of after dinner screams, though.
Right.
Yeah. Depending upon what the meal was like, you know. Yeah, that's an interesting story.
I love it.
I have to get into the amusement parks now. I'm just curious how or what. Well, before I do that, do you believe in inanimate objects having spirits or no?
Ah, well,
Or maybe
I
objects that were used by someone?
I suppose that it would be more of a case of an inanimate object being a draw for someone
Mm-hmm.
to return. Returning to Chicago for just a little bit, one of my other favorite museums in Chicago is the Museum of Science and Industry.
Hmm.
That is the last building that is left, the only building that is left from the Columbian Exposition of 1893.
Wow.
Yeah,
Hmm.
really cool. Um, and that was actually the first building that the Field Museum was in
Mm-hmm.
when it started. The
Mm-hmm.
Field eventually built a bigger museum a little farther north on Lakeshore Drive and moved all the artifacts there, which left that building open to become the home of the Museum of Science and Industry. The MSI is home to a lot of really wonderful exhibits, one of them being the U-505. It is the only German submarine that was captured during World War II,
Oh, okay.
surrounded by secrecy. The Allied powers could not let the Germans know that they had captured this submarine because one of the things that was captured was an Enigma machine, one
Mm-hmm.
of the coding machines, and a
Right.
whole bunch of papers.
Right.
So if the Germans knew that the U-505 had been compromised, they would change their codes, and then it would
Right.
be even more difficult to break.
Right.
So the Allied the hunter killer task group was sent out to under um, under the command of Captain Dan Gallery, and his ships actually surrounded the U-505 and shelled it a couple times and brought it to the surface. There was one German soldier that died in the capture. He's not the one who haunts the ship, though.
Hmm.
All the other Germans were picked up from the water and taken as prisoners of war to America. They
Right.
tried to get word out that this U-505 had been captured, and they were not able to get word to Germany
Right.
that it had been captured. So it was a success.
Do you know where it was captured? I'm sorry.
It was, oh golly, I would have to look that
No,
up. I
don't
don't
worry
know
about it. I was
exactly
just
where.
curious
Yeah,
what area of the world it was captured in.
I think somewhere in this, I want to say the South Pacific.
Oh, interesting. Hmm.
Yeah, I don't think it was, or maybe in the South Atlantic. They towed it to the east coast of America.
Hmm.
So somewhere around Virginia. So I think it would have to have been the South Atlantic. I'm not
Right.
exactly
Okay.
sure though.
Yeah.
So before this capture happened, the U-505 had a very checkered past. She had three different captains. The second captain, the first captain, was in charge of her for several months, and then he got appendicitis and had to retire. The second captain was a man named Peter Czech, and this guy was absolutely hated by his crew.
Hmm.
He was a hard character. He would dress down his superior officers in front of the enlisted men. He was just a real hard captain to serve under.
Hmm.
And he wasn't a very good captain either. Um, there was one point in time where the U-505 was about to dive, and an English bomber flew over it, and the English bomber dropped a couple of depth charges. The U-505 was so close to the surface that these depth charges detonated really close to the surface and knocked the plane out of the sky.
Hmm.
And the pilot actually was killed in that
Wow.
bombing raid.
Hmm.
But the U-505 took some damage from this because it was so close to the surface when it happened. And Czech wanted to abandon ship. He was like, nope, nope, all hope is lost. Let's just jump ship. And his first officer, talked him out of it. He's like, no, no, we can save the ship. That's fine. So they limped to a French port for repairs. And asking French workmen to repair a German ship
Hmm.
during World War II
Hmm.
is not going to have very good results for the Germans. They sabotaged that ship every chance they got.
Hmm.
She would leave the port, she would get several miles out to sea, then something would go wrong and they'd have to limp back to port again.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
it became a joke among the other U-boat captains. They were like, well, we know there's one ship that's always going to come back to port. Oh, yeah, they just ribbed Czech unmercifully for
Hmm.
that. They finally got underway and they were out doing the U-505 was out doing its patrols, and it was shelled again. And this time it did take more damage than previously.
Hmm.
Czech was up in the conning tower, and he was so freaked out by the fact that they were being shelled again that he shot himself in the head.
Wow.
The only U-boat commander to commit suicide during World War II.
Hmm.
The shot didn't kill him. When a U-boat dives, you have to be very, very, very quiet because the enemy, the Allied radar is going to pick up any sound.
Right.
So you have to, when a U-boat dives, most of the sailors are supposed to go and lie down on their bunks and be very, very quiet. So you have this guy who is not only just fired a pistol in the submarine, he's also screaming his head off. because he's not dead and he's been shot in the head.
So every sonar in the area could
Is
hear
gonna
him.
pick this up, yeah.
Right.
So again, the first officer took charge and he had the men take Check to his bunk and put a pillow over his face and smother him.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So he injured himself with the gunshot, but he didn't
Yes,
mortally kill. He didn't kill himself.
exactly right.
Right. Interesting.
So yeah, so Check is definitely the one who is haunting the conning tower and the entire U-505.
Well, can you give me a for instance? When this is when it after the war, it ended up in a museum in Chicago.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It was used for practice for the Navy for several decades. And then they were going to scuttle her because they were like, well, what use do we have for a German submarine? And it was now Admiral Dan Gallery
Hmm.
who said, you know what, this is an important piece of history. And my men and I are the ones who found it. So you are not going to scuttle her. You're not going to
Hmm.
sink this ship, not on my watch. So he got together, he raised funds to have it taken from Virginia to Chicago.
Okay.
And it was his brother, actually. I just remember this brother's name, but he was some sort of pastor in Chicago. And he encouraged his parishioners and all his friends to contribute towards bringing the U-505 to Chicago. It was displayed outside for quite some time. Again, this is what I remember from my school child visits to the U-505 was that it was outdoors for a very, very long time. It is now inside where it's protected from the Chicago winters.
Hmm.
um, so it is inside now. The last time I went to the Museum of Science and Industry, oh gosh, oh, it was in October, I believe.
Hmm.
Um, and I got to visit the U-505 again. And I went to, I actually got to talk to one of the security guards. And when I bought my ticket for the museum, the lady at the ticket counter said, you have to talk to the security guard because he's got this great story. And she told me very generally about this woman who had seen an apparition on the top of the conning tower of the U-505. So I went down there, happened to see the security guard, and lo and behold, it was this guy that talked to the woman right after she saw this apparition.
Okay.
And he shared this entire story with me. He was so generous and so wonderful to talk to.
Hmm.
He said that a woman came up to him and said, she asked, I mean, this is a museum of science and industry. So her question was, does the museum have hologram technology to enhance the viewing experience of the U-505?
Right.
And the security guard said, no, we don't. What did you see?
Hmm.
And this woman saw a man standing on top of the conning tower. He was dressed in a dress uniform and he had some sort of insignia on his sleeve. Now, this security guard was very well versed in World War II history in general and the U-505 in particular. And
Hmm.
he realized from her description of what this guy looked like that she had seen the ghost of Captain Dan Gallery
Hmm.
because American sailors, and naval officers, when they are in dress uniform, they wear their insignia on their sleeve.
Right.
So, and
And
there's another really cool story, actual ghost story about the U-505 that I'll share really quickly.
yeah.
Um, I went there a couple years ago and I don't speak German, but I wrote down a bunch of questions in German to ask in hopes of catching an EVP, catching a ghost voice on my recorder. I didn't catch anything, but there was another investigator that did the exact same thing I did, just went down there on the down low and just very quietly asked some questions and did some recording, hoping to catch something. And she said that the only EVP she caught was a German voice saying 2100, which is 2100. And she was like, why would someone say that? That's kind of random. But then she looked at the rest of the exhibit, and there is a logbook from the U-505 on display. And on the day that Peter Czech shot himself, there is a notation for 2100 hours, which is 11 o'clock at night in military time, and it
Hmm.
simply said "Commandant tot," commander dead.
Hmm.
So that's
Interesting.
why somebody said 2100.
So for those who don't know, when you say EVP, you bring what I guess the trade calls a ghost box.
Right, yeah, I did not have a ghost box or a spirit box with me. I was
Okay.
simply asking questions and hoping to record an answer.
Hmm.
I didn't have anything spitting out sound that could form an answer that I could hear right then. I was just
Right.
hoping to catch something that I would catch later.
But the other lady
So
that heard the 2100, she had one.
I don't think so. I think that was a straight EVP instead of, or a disembodied, no, not even a disembodied voice, something that she caught later instead of what we call an RVP, which is a radio voice phenomenon.
Hmm.
And EVP is electronic voice phenomenon, which
I
is
see.
something you catch later. That's not necessarily, it doesn't come through the sound of a spirit box or a voice box,
Okay, so
a
she
ghost.
just went in with your standard tape recorder of some
Yeah,
sort. Okay, I got it. Is that what you
yeah,
did as well?
that's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, the antenna, no pun intended, but the antenna would go right up if you hear German, right?
Right.
In a museum in Chicago.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. I wrote down all sorts of wonderful questions like what's your name? Why don't you like women on your boat? Because Czech does not like women on his boat. There
Mm,
was a guide that was kind of trash talking Czech. She was standing in a doorway and the steel door came and slammed and hit her and injured her.
mm.
Yeah.
Is it like a well visited site in the museum? The
Oh man, it's one of the most popular exhibits.
Okay. So when you or the other lady went by, you started just asking questions. It must have stuck out like a sore thumb to whoever else was around.
Well,
I'm just
well,
curious.
yeah.
Yeah.
I actually I popped for something extra and I got there very early in the morning.
Oh, okay.
They had this thing where you could get there before the museum opened and
Oh,
have
okay.
a private tour and with an actual guide that took you through the entire exhibit and answered any questions that you have. They often have World War II veterans standing there answering questions too,
Mm,
which is neat. But yeah, this was a little extra thing that the extra program that the museum offered, which
wow.
was get there before the museum opens, have a semi-private tour. I thought this was the perfect time to do some recording when there
Sure.
were a
Sure.
whole bunch of people around.
So that thing is haunted by both someone that was on the ship when the German captain shot himself,
Right.
and also the American captain who was, you said, became an admiral,
Yes,
and he
yes.
was the one that was most the protagonist to bring it to Chicago in the first place.
That's right.
So
Yes.
it's kind of weird that they're both there at the same time. Oh, hopefully not the same
Really?
time.
Yeah. I don't know
Yeah.
if they ever run into each other
Who
or
knows?
not. I've not
Yeah.
heard any stories about that.
Yeah.
But yes, I think Dan Gallery is very attached to that ship. I think he's very fond of it because
Right.
that was, my goodness, that was one of the most important moves of the war was the capture of this ship.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, they made a movie about that scenario, capturing a U-boat intact for the Enigma machines.
Mhm.
I know the
Yeah.
British, I think, caught one too.
I
Um,
I don't know. I
yeah.
don't know if they tried to.
Yeah.
I am reasonably sure that the U-505 was the only ship that was
Oh,
actually captured.
okay. So that would have been the ship that they based the movie on.
I think
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Yeah. Interesting story about the submarine as well.
Yeah.
Not just the haunting of it.
Right, yeah,
Yeah.
I love the history behind these stories.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we discussed that the last time you were on the show was
Oh, yeah.
everything has a history. That's
Probably.
that's that's part of the charm of investigating ghosts, I guess, is learning the history of things too.
Oh, for sure.
So you pick up a lot of these tidbits. But I wanted to get into the amusement parks. Uh, how what made you include that in the new book?
Well, first of all, because I wanted three different venues.
Okay.
I didn't want to do just zoos and museums. I thought it would be fun to include amusement parks too.
Yeah.
Um, and then I actually ended up finding quite a few stories about haunted amusement parks, um, and some that I was not even aware of.
Yeah, I'd love a for instance because that is intriguing me. Yeah.
Another, for instance, well, one of my favorites is, and I don't know if I hope I'm not going to get in trouble for saying this on the air, but there's a dear friend of mine, Liz Nygaard, who is a psychic medium, and she is friends with a woman named Grandma Rose.
Okay.
And Grandma Rose will seek Liz out, and she actually sat and talked to Liz at the laundromat for about an hour and a half, and actually wrote a note for Liz to give to someone that Grandma Rose wanted to get a note to. And she's always very sweet. She's a very grandmotherly sort of person. She's gives great hugs. And when Liz ran into Grandma Rose at the laundromat, she was kind of surprised to see her there because Grandma Rose usually haunts the theater at Six Flags Great America in Gurnee.
Okay. So she haunts the movie theater in the amusement park?
Yes, yes, there
Okay.
are a couple of theaters there, and the bigger one is the one where they put on all the comedy shows and the acrobatic shows and whatnot.
Mhm.
And this woman actually had a heart attack in one of the theater seats, and
Ah.
Liz took me there and showed me Grandma Rose's seat.
Mm.
I took a picture, but nothing showed up.
Now, how do they know it's haunted though? What does she
Well,
do?
she will appear to, she is very fond of the theater. She is very fond of the actors and actresses in the theater. She's
Hmm.
very protective of the young people who come on stage, and she will appear to them, and she will appear to Liz with messages for them that there's no way there's no way Liz could know. It's
Right.
obviously Grandma was telling her this information to pass along to people.
Wow. That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
But she doesn't present herself to anybody but that medium.
I think she has appeared to other people. I think
Hmm.
she shows up in the theater every once in a while.
Okay.
I've just never talked to anyone else who has seen her.
It's not really a haunting. She just makes herself known sometimes.
Right, right,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. She's
Yeah.
just very, very glad to be still in the theater and
Hmm.
still hanging around theater folks.
Right. And in general, Sylvia, in all your years of investigating these stories, do you find most ghosts are kindly? I don't know what else to call it, rather than evil, so to speak.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
firmly believe that because there are many more pleasant people in life that you'll encounter rather than pure evil or grumbly or annoying to be with.
Right.
Most people are nice, and most spirits that I've run across, I've been very lucky.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Most spirits that I've run across that I have encountered have been pleasant to interact with.
Right.
Um, I think it also helps that I am naturally a very polite person. It's just the way I was raised.
Right.
And I bring that politeness and that respect to my investigations.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't want someone barging into my house and asking me a bunch of weird questions and wanting me to make noises for them.
Right.
You approach it just like you approach any other conversation with the living, is have some respect, show a pleasant demeanor, and you'll be much more likely to get a reaction
Right.
if
Uh,
you're just kind.
yeah. Do you think they have a sense of who you are and why you're there before you even interact with them?
I really do. Of course, I've been at the Peoria State Hospital so many times that the spirits there, a couple of the spirits there do know me and ask after me when I'm not there, which is
Hmm.
very, very sweet. Also, I really think that, and I don't know how this happens because I not haven't crossed the veil in this lifetime yet, and I've forgotten about any previous experiences. Um, I really do believe that the dead know things that we are not privy to. They have information that we don't.
Hmm.
There was a wonderful conversation I had with another psychic medium, not Liz, someone else, when I went to give a talk on the Peoria State Hospital down in Springfield, Illinois. Just got into a conversation with this lady, and she said, well, the part that was germane to me was that she said that there is a nurse from the hospital that shows up every time I give a presentation on the hospital, which is very, very cool. But
Mm.
I was talking with someone else about this medium, and he said, "Oh my gosh, if she tells you something, it's true. Listen to what she says, because she will go on an investigation and she will say the spirits that are going to be the subjects of her investigation for that
Hmm.
evening, for that
Hmm.
weekend,
Hmm.
will show up to her earlier during the week and say, this is who I am. This is what I want you to know about me before you go in. So yeah, I really
So
do.
they're well aware of why
Yeah, I
you're
think
there,
so.
and the reason you're there and who you are, and that you're an author and then doing investigative work. They know that already.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they might even know it before you do.
I think so, yes. I was in Louisville, Kentucky, and visiting a very old cemetery outside of Louisville, Kentucky, and I brought candy for the kids. Unfortunately, this particular graveyard has a lot of children buried in it. So of
Mhm.
course I brought treats for the kids, brought Swedish fish.
Mhm. Okay.
And I put some Swedish fish down on the stones. And Liz told me about a week after that, she was doing a spirit box session, and she was asked, she said someone asked her, "Are you the one who put candy on the stones?"
Oh,
And she said, "No, no, that was my friend Sylvia."
wow. Interesting. That came in over the ghost box, the spirit
Yeah,
box. Yeah. What's the
yeah,
right way
yeah.
to say that? Ghost box or spirit box? It doesn't
Either
matter.
one is
Okay.
fine.
Yeah. So the amusement parks. Um, where did you go to do the amusement park part of the investigation for the book?
Well, I personally went to Six Flags in
Okay.
Gurnee. Just about every Six Flags in America has some sort of haunting attached to it.
Hmm.
There are like half a dozen Six Flags that have ghost stories attached to it. Other than that, I did a lot of reading. I didn't
Hmm.
visit every park personally, but I did a lot of reading, and there are some really fascinating stories out there. There is a park in Mexico called Le Le Reina Magical, the Magic Kingdom.
Hmm.
That is an abandoned amusement park, which is creepy all on its own.
Hmm.
Um, the lore behind this is that it was built over a cemetery,
Ah,
which is
okay.
always a bad idea.
Yeah, never a good idea. No.
Yeah, so and it became run down and abandoned after a while, and it is currently abandoned. And the theme of this park is fairy tales. So there are statues of the seven dwarfs, there's statues of Cinderella, there's Cinderella's castle, and it's all just run down and faded and shabby. And one of the statues that has gained a lot of notoriety is the statue of Snow White. And that statue is said to move around the park. It walks around the park. People have filmed her walking around the park. And one of the creepiest videos I ever watched was someone had broken into the park just to film and look around at these statues that had the paint weather blasted off of them. The statue of Snow White is pretty well the worse for wear, but you can still see the colors on her skirt and her bodice and everything, and her hair is still dark, and her eyes are still painted on. And this person was filming and had the camera on Snow White's face, and all of a sudden the statue blinked.
Oh boy.
Yeah,
Hmm.
super creepy.
I can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that was before CGI or
Right.
yeah. Well, that would make me turn tail and get the hell out of there pretty quick.
That's exactly what this filmer did.
Well,
Next
with your
out of there like his
permission,
butt was on fire.
before we started recording, and I should have said this in the beginning, behind me is the book cover of your new
Yeah.
release. And I just want to show and maybe even talk for a second about this. Just give me a second. I want to share this page. It's called bookshop.org. And we spoke about this prior to recording.
Yeah.
Um, if you could tell us a little bit about bookshop.org, and I know
Hey,
it
there we
has
go.
a lot of your books are on there.
It does,
Yeah.
yes. Even some of my fiction. How cool. The Taming of
Yeah.
the Widow. All right, so yes, bookshop.org is a wonderful website. Amazon does not need our money.
Right. Right.
Bezos is doing perfectly fine on his own. So I was really thrilled to find this bookshop.org site. When you make a purchase from this website,
Hmm.
part of your purchase price goes into a fund that is later divvied up between independent bookstores. So when
Excellent
you make a
idea.
purchase, yeah, oh man, it's so great. When
Yeah.
you make a purchase from bookshop.org, part of your fund, part of your purchase price goes to help indie bookstores, which I think is really special.
It's a tremendous idea, and I like also. I don't want to beat up on Amazon, but I like how you can see multiple titles of a specific author. Obviously, yours here in
Yeah.
one shot. Just a little scroll down, you can see.
Right. You don't have to
Yeah,
go hunting for it.
right. You can see all the titles in one shot, which I enjoy. The one we
Yeah.
spoke about the last time you were on the show was, I think, this one, Fractured Spirits,
I
right?
believe so,
Yeah,
yes.
that was the one because we did delve deep into Peoria State Hospital then. I
Hmm.
remember we discussed that in detail,
Yeah.
and I'm sure that's still selling well. That book,
It is, yes,
yeah,
I'm happy to say.
yeah. How and the Spirit of Christmas. I think that was out for this Christmas or the Christmas before.
That came out a couple of Christmases ago.
Okay, yeah, I thought so. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, but I'm sure sales pick up in
Oh
the
yeah, it's
fourth
very
quarter
popular during the
in
during
the
the
in the fourth.
holidays,
And there
yes.
was another one with a calendar, right?
Days
Trying
of
to
the
remember.
Dead,
Oh,
yes.
here it is. Yeah, Days of the Dead.
Yeah.
Yeah, also an interesting concept. Yeah. But the one in question, the one we spoke mostly about today, is Gone on Vacation, which is this one where my cursor is, if you could see it.
Yeah, with the Ferris wheel. Now, when I went to the MSI and spoke with that security guard at the submarine, I
Uh huh.
had a copy of the book with me
You had a
because
what?
I had a copy of Gone on Vacation with
Oh,
me.
okay. Okay.
I'll put in a little plug here. If
Hmm.
you buy the book and you flip to the very back page,
Hmm.
there is, when we come back to our screens, I'll share this and show everybody.
Yeah.
Um, oh, wait, I can show it now. Okay,
Yeah.
so I don't know if that's going
We'll
to be.
show it. It's a little
Okay,
glary. Let me stop
yeah,
sharing for a second because I
okay,
I want to see what you're doing.
okay.
Yeah. There you go.
All right. So if you go to any of these places and you need a little travel buddy to take a picture with, to take a selfie with, you can take a picture with this little guy.
It looks
My
like
sister,
Casper.
yeah, my sister drew him for me.
Oh, cool.
And,
Okay.
and she's going to draw another picture of him for Gone on Vacation too. And so his name is Tenny Brosity, and he is the little mascot for Gone on Vacation.
Oh, very nice. And just out of curiosity, and I ask this a lot to authors, who did that book design? Because it's a pretty cool book cover.
Oh, that was all my publisher.
Oh, okay.
I turned the manuscript into him. I said, I have no idea what I want on the cover. Feel free to do whatever you want. And he was also kind enough to provide the illustrations for the inside.
Oh,
He
very
has a
nice. Yeah.
collection of old postcards, vintage postcards. and he provided so many marvelous postcards for the inside
Yeah.
illustrations.
It's a nice creative book cover. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love it. So anyway, I was telling this story. I brought a copy of the book to the museum,
Oh yes.
and I showed it to this security guard, and he immediately recognized the picture. Now, I said that the Museum of Science and Industry is in the only building that is left from the 1893 Columbian Exposition.
Right.
The Columbian Exposition in Chicago is also the very first place a Ferris wheel was used as a ride.
Ah.
It was invented for the 1893 World's Fair.
Oh.
And
Interesting.
if you read or listen to the book The Devil in the White City, they go through all this. They had a big contest because the Eiffel Tower had just been unveiled in France a few years before, and Chicago wanted, the United States wanted something just as impressive as the Eiffel Tower. So they held
Mhm.
this big contest to find out what was going to be the big centerpiece of the 1893 World's Fair.
Right.
And some guy came up with this Ferris wheel, and
I think his name was Ferris, wasn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
George Ferris. I think
It
it
was,
was George Ferris.
but I think he was also French. No.
I I honestly
I don't
don't
know.
know.
I might have went too a bridge too far on that one, but I know his name was Ferris.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So the just that little saga inside that book of how the Ferris wheel was tested and built, and they weren't sure it was going to work right. They thought it might fall over, and it was just this nail-biting suspense of a Ferris wheel.
Hmm.
It was the very first one. And the security guards took one look at this cover, and he's like, "Oh, hey, that's the original Ferris wheel from the 1893 World's Fair." I said,
Very
"Yes, it
cool.
is."
That's very cool. Yeah.
Because he works right there. He worked right where that was put up for the very first time. So
Wow. So
yeah,
that Ferris wheel on your cover is the first?
yeah, yeah.
Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. Very cool.
And the
So
security guard ended up buying that copy of the books, which is very nice of him.
kudos to your publisher for coming up with that concept. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, I was thrilled to bits when I saw the actual finished product. I was just,
Yeah.
dude, man, you've outdone yourself with this.
Yeah.
So
Really
shout out to
nice.
Troy Taylor of American Hauntings Inc. He is a wizard when it comes to books.
Very cool. And I just wanted to bring up, because I know we're wrapping it up soon, but I wanted to bring up, going back to bookshop.org.
Yeah.
I also wanted to throw in, and I've mentioned this before when I speak to other authors. If you go to your local bookstore and ask for, as an example, this book, if they don't have it in stock, they'll order it, and it'll help that particular bookstore. Because generally they'll
Absolutely.
order more than one copy, so it helps you. But it's
Yeah.
also good for the independent bookseller. They're more than willing to order it, so you can pick it up at your local independent bookseller. Just go in there and ask for this particular book.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Works that way with libraries too,
yeah,
actually.
yeah, yeah.
If
Absolutely,
your
you're right.
library,
Yeah,
if your local library doesn't carry it, they can get it for you from
yes,
anywhere in the United States. They can get it for you outside the country, but they don't really like doing that.
I understand. But I do appreciate you coming back. And
Oh, absolutely.
the name of the book is "Gone on Vacation: Haunted Zoos, Museums, and Amusement Parks." And I think anybody watching or listening to us would know this is going to be a pretty cool book to read, just based on
Thank
Sylvia's
you.
description of it. And I highly recommend it, even though I haven't read it myself yet. But I
You
always
will
like
though.
this subject matter. So I do appreciate you coming back on to discuss your new book, and I wish you much success with it.
Tom, thank you very much. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Sylvia. Take care. We'll see you further on up the road.
Sounds good.
Okay.